this was a talk that I gave earlier this year at the conference called the Association of Practical and Professional Ethics in the United States. And it's a multidisciplinary, multi-field ethics conference. But there's a particular group of people who attend this conference who we've called ourselves the RISE Consortium, Research, Integrity, Scholars, and Educators. And I would say it's maybe 4 dozen people who come regularly and both do research in research integrity and teach in this field. So this was the audience for this talk, but it's related to the what we all share in common here. So I think I'm going to skip the sort of preamble stuff about race and gender issues, because I think we all have a general sense of what we mean by that. But I do want to also flag their intersectionality issues if you're a member of a gender and an ethnic group and a religious group, where those challenges you might find, the biases against you, have intersectional considerations that multiply. So I don't want to lose sight of that, but I'm not going to focus on it. So my main questions about race and gender issues in RCR, Responsible Conduct of Research, are how do the identities of people affect the experience of research ethics issues? And also, how can a consideration of issues of race and gender help us teach and improve research ethics itself, if that makes sense? So the first claim that I wanted to make, that I don't think I'm going to need to do a lot of convincing for all of you, is that typically issues of race and gender aren't considered part of RCR education. So they're not specified in the core areas that our federal granting agencies typically outline for us. And I also did a quick scan just out of my own curiosity in the World Conference of Research Integrity programs that I found online. And I scanned for race and gender in the online programs. In 2015, there was nothing. In 2017, there was one mention of gender. And in 2019, there was one mention of gender and no mention of race, except for the title of my own talk. So to me, this is supporting the claim that we're not focusing on it very much as part of research ethics. So the other thing that some of you may or may not know about is in the United States, there's actually a specific history about gender and research integrity. And it was in the 90s when there was a discussion about what should we define as research misconduct. And it included this phrase of serious deviation from normal or typical procedures. The exact phrasing is escaping me, but serious deviation was the important clause. And there was a sort of fight between people about what does serious deviation allow in, right? Is serious deviation going to give you way too much latitude? It made researchers very nervous. And so there was a debate about whether or not to include that. And the reason that the NSF had it initially was because of someone they had funded who was in another country and sexually assaulted undergraduate and graduate students who are with him in the field. But in order to control the federal funding, they needed to have a way to pull it back and acknowledge that the person misused the funds. And so that's why they were arguing for the serious deviation. But in the end, the side that was arguing against serious deviation won out. And so now it's just fabrication, falsification, and plagiarism in the United States and in most other countries for serious, for research misconduct. So I think there's this special thought that people have in the United States that gender just, of course, these are horrible things. Of course, you should prosecute someone, et cetera, but they're not research ethics issues. I think there's a lot more to it than that. So I think first I want to just go through a couple of arguments for including issues of race and gender. And I think they amount to epistemic reasons, structural reasons, and cultural reasons. And that is, this is argument for including issues of race and gender in responsible conduct of research classes, and then for that matter, in our scholarship. So epistemic reasons, I think this is sort of the lowest hanging fruit, because if you can explain to a scientist that gender bias gives them bad science, then they go, oh, well, then we should pay attention to it, right? And I have mixed feelings about leading with that. I think on the one hand, it's going to be most successful for a lot of people because it doesn't seem to require them to change their political commitments or their frameworks for how they think about gender and race, but they can locate it entirely to the good of the science. On the other hand, then you don't actually get them to broaden their thinking and start to see these things on their own, right? They're looking at race and gender analyses instrumentally for the science, not, and that would not invite them to think about it in broader terms. So the structural reason, I think, is you need to be able to see the structures within which you're doing the science, within which you're doing the research, because otherwise you're going to miss some of the ethical issues, right? And if you are a person who, like many in the United States, who's dedicated to the individualist perspective and only the individualist perspective, you might say it's all about what the individual chooses to do. It doesn't have anything to do with the surrounding framework. Then you're going to miss the difference between a few bad apples and then the bad barrel making the apples bad, right? So that's the structural reason. And then cultural reasons, I think there's a lot of research showing that people's perception of the culture within which they work directly affects their self-reporting of how often they engage in serious, sorry, not serious deviation. What's the phrase? It's escaping me, but
questionable.
Thank you. QRPs, questionable research practices. Not enough coffee. So yes, questionable research practices, so that if you think you work in a place that's not very ethical, that has problems, whether it's about race and gender or about other things, cutting corners and things like that, then you learn that that's okay and you self-report that you're doing that more frequently. So I think these are the at least how I'm seeing it right now, these are the main categories of thinking about the arguments for inclusion of race and gender issues. So I'm just going to run through them quickly, and then we can open it up for conversation. So the epistemic argument is poor methods arising from bias create bad science. And so there's examples of using single-sex animals, using problematic racial categories, seeing race and gendered people as being less fully human, has led to problematic use of human beings in research. And there are some issues related to success in science, peer mentoring, and things like that. So the general claim is, if you understand these points about bias, then you'll be able to see them and avoid them, right? So I think that's a pretty straightforward one. In terms of structure, I think people might be a little hesitant to include structural analyses in a research ethics or responsible conduct of research course. But I also want to argue we already kind of do that. When we talk about authorship, when we talk about peer review, we are inherently indexing our concerns to asymmetrical power relations. And we're specifically doing that so that people can start to see where those problems tend to arise. So if we're already doing these mini structural analyses in areas that are acceptable in RCR, maybe we can branch it out a little bit. And then finally, the culture argument is, as I was saying, these are just a few quotes from some of the research I was mentioning. Scientific misconduct seems to be an environmental issue as much as a matter of personal integrity. Perceptions of justice in your workplace are positively associated with self-reportive ideal behaviors. Non-collegial environments are correlated with research misconduct, et cetera. So if we teach students how to foster better research environments, it has a sort of global or systemic effect potentially on improving our research ethics and our research integrity. So one of the things I've done in the States is participate in the Office of Research Integrity conference. And it was a sort of active learning conference. And my topic was race and gender. So we had this great opportunity to talk about, okay, how would you include this in your research integrity courses? And I had been packaging this in a module about bias in research, so I could kind of fit all kinds of biases that I wanted to talk about there, including conflict of interest, but not limited to conflict of interest. So we assigned the people at the conference the task of getting together in small groups and coming up with some activities that would help students in an RCR class develop their awareness of these issues. And so I just wanted to share a couple of them with you. Let's see, sorry, I'm going to skip to this one first and I'll go back. So my favorite one was, this was a group of men who were working at a government lab, and I'll just declare that I had some stereotypes about that, and I wasn't sure what they were going to come up with, but I loved their example and they had already done it. So they said, let's get a group together and come up with the top 10 leaders in a particular field, their field. And then they came up with another list. Well, who are the top 10 female leaders and who are the top 10 minority leaders? And then they went back to number one and said, well, why weren't some of these people on these other lists on our original list? So it really gave them some self-insight into how they were processing what counts as a leader, and enabled them to open up the idea of leadership in their field more. So that was really interesting. Peer review, you could look up journals in your field, figure out how many men and women are on the board. You could do this also with gender, with ethnicity, to the extent that you could figure that out. And then talk with each other about, what are you seeing in the editorial board? Are you seeing equal representation? Are you seeing, weight in one direction or the other? What does that mean? Could it mean anything? Does it mean anything? So I thought those were really nice examples. And then just sort of at a more abstract level, here are some of the examples that I've used in my own class. In authorship and collaboration, there's a woman named Cassidy Sugimoto who's done a bunch of work about gender and authorship, including self-citations, number of citations in general, number of collaborators, those kinds of things. And so her work is a really good place to go to sort of try and flesh some of this out. But I asked my students, look at this article that says men self-cite twice as much as women. What should we make of that, right? Should men self-cite less, or should women self-cite more, or should it be somewhere in the middle, right? So there's no obvious answer, but it allows you just to compare these two and go, well, what might the implications be of this, whether one is doing it wrong or not? There are gender differences in perceived contributorship, right? So women tend to think some things are more important to authorship than men, right? And you can see, depending on who's in the power position, which ones will get onto the authorship list. There is an article, this is probably 10 or more years ago now, that blinded grant reviews resulted in more awards to women. This is something NSF did on their own. So there's lots of things like this that you can sort of bring into class, either briefly or as a larger case study, that will help students see some of these issues. And so I think in general, our challenge is to challenge other people's notion of what counts as a research ethics or research integrity issue that's worthy of being taught in the classroom. And I think that if we just look at it as compliance-based teaching, which I probably don't need to tell all of you, tends to be the norm, right? People are only taking these classes because they have to. And you have to fight to get a little bit of time in the STEM disciplines to get them to take a research ethics course. So when you teach it that way, there's not going to be a lot of challenging of official doctrines, and it will make people teach to the test, as we say in the United States. They'll go to the 9 core areas that are typically cited, even though nobody ever said those are supposed to be the 9 core areas. They're named, and so people go straight for them, and then they think once they've covered those, that's the end of it. And I think we need to broaden the approach and talk about structural challenges in the world and how they show up in research integrity, and how they show up in research, and what those have to do with each other, and how to challenge and address those. So I'm going to stop sharing now, and I will then drop the poster into the chat. I have to find that link here. So I kind of turned some of these concerns into a poster, and that's the link. And I'll apologize in advance, because although I spent hours and hours and hours working on the graphic here, my naivete in design shows itself. Although I did master a lot of little tricks in PowerPoint slides that I was never aware of before. It was my way of trying to explain why we need to include these issues is because it's part of the fabric of good science. And I sort of was understanding the warp and the weft of the fabric as things like sound methods, careful execution, good data management, honest reporting, interwoven with ethical sensitivity, epistemic humility, organizational justice, among other things. And then down below, you can see some of the examples of how you might do that. So it's this sort of why and how poster. So I'm going to stop there because I've been talking for quite a while, and I'm interested to hear what others do in their classes, for one thing.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for this very informative presentation, and I like very much the different approaches, the epistemic approach, structural. That made me think. I'm using this, you know, that I come from compliance. Or also when I talk about the gender issue, I say that my background is justice, but I switched to the business case. So from the legal case to the business case, and now it's the digital case. Also in order to make, to engage the stakeholders. So that's very interesting. Thank you very much. And coming back to your question, how do you teach in your classes? Julia, would you like to start?
Yeah. So in Path to Integrity, we have these learning cards, and so we have no learning card on gender. Yeah, so we did not include it. Why? Because what we decided as a consortium, we decided to cover the 8 topics from the European Code of Conduct, and the European Code of Conduct does not. We had it in sessions before. It does not lay out gender as explicitly, as a topic. But what do we have? So we have a storyline which goes actually through all the cards. Yeah, so it's a story about research misconduct, and then the learners are led to somehow work with the story, and to exercise their thinking and their reflection. And in this story, we do have a female researcher who is told by a male researcher to alter her data. Yeah, and this was at the beginning. It came from me, so I had to write the story. So I just wrote the story. Yeah, I didn't think much about it. Yeah, it was my thinking was about, okay, it has to be easy, it has to be easy to be understood, and so on and so on. But then when I presented the story the first time to the consortium, we had a really long discussion why I used this stereotype that the female has to follow the order of the male. And some of our consortium members wanted that we switch it around, so that we crisscross the stereotypes. And so we are still working actually with this point. We left it because we said, no, it has to be a story which we can relate to easily, and we relate to this stereotype more easily. It's not the right one. We do not want to push it, but we can relate to it and we can discuss it. So what happens now in the classroom? We have one card in which we discuss violent situations, not violent in the sense of punching, but even psychological violence and so on and so on. And when we use these cards with this storyline, the students start to discuss gender aspects in research. And it depends on how far they are. So we have sessions with actually high school students. They are 16 or older. We have we make sessions with bachelor students, master students, and PhD. So we have the whole range. And what we can see actually is when they are getting older, like when they're getting to be more used to be a researcher, like the master and the PhD students, they emphasize the gender aspect more than the younger ones. So the younger ones actually they emphasize that it is not okay that somebody tells somebody else to alter something when it's not okay, but they don't specify it on a gender on the gender topic. But the older ones do. So that's something which what we experience and what we are still working on, but we don't have a solution in a sense of is this the best way to go? We do not know. So.
Yeah, if I may enter here, Julia, do you remember at the beginning of the project that I think both of us, we were quite, we were really having a big input, or we really wanted to focus a lot on gender, and that it was the others telling us, no, but this is not a project on gender. This is a different project. This is a project on research integrity. And so they pushed us back within the consortium, which I also found quite interesting. And they told us to focus on research integrity. And yeah.
Yeah, because it doesn't count as a research ethics issue.
No.
Yeah. That's exactly as you told, Lisa, in your presentation. Yeah, in Europe it's the same. Or the countries we represent in the consortium, that we have the European Code of Conduct, which we relate to, and their gender is not an issue for research integrity and research ethics. So it's not an official topic, but
right.
It appears everywhere you work. Yeah. So I can. Last time I asked, is it now a paradigm shift in the sense that we alter what we see to be a scientific, what is a scientific procedure? Is a scientific procedure that so what we have in the European Code of Conduct, we have the sentence that we have to respect our colleagues and the people we do we do tests with. Yeah. But what does that mean, to respect them? Do we have to take the gender into account? Do we have to take race into account? Do we have to take their perspective into account? So where is the limit, and where do we want to? Actually, I think it's a question of where do we want to go. I will be back in 1 minute.
And then I think another issue is, and there you are really much farther than we are in Europe, and I also said this before. It's here we have started the discussion about gender, but in fact we're talking about sex, so about the binary man, women, and not even thinking of race. The race discussion has not even started here, although I think it would be very, very necessary, very important, because I think if we focused on race, we would be astonished and also shocked in European Union how we treat things scientifically. And I think that would be a big moment, awakening moment. But I have the perception that we are still far away from this discussion. And yeah, I don't know. It's will take some time. Julia, I just said that still here we have now started with our discussion, which is very binary. So sex, so it's man, women. But we have not nearly come to the point that we would take into account race. And that I'm thinking, whenever I think of race, for example, I live in Spain, and I'm very much aware of the fact that here we have a huge problem with Roma, the Roma population. So I think that, for example, this occurs to me, right? So whenever there's, as I'm working as a gender expert, I'm working, for example, with CEDAW. CEDAW is a committee focusing on the elimination on gender-based violence. And they always tell Spain that they have to work on the discrimination against Roma women, because they are really on really on the lowest level here in society. But I think nobody has ever taken this into account. No Spanish investigator, or also on European level, the Roma question is still a question. And if I'm not mistaken, it's not really, doesn't really play a big role. And I think this is really a huge problem.
Is there much discussion about intersectionality?
Not at all. We have just started. Mhm.
Yeah, that would help a lot with exactly that kind of example. I also wonder, are there examples of abuse of Roma in medical experiments in Spain?
I would not know, but I will check. Mhm.
I mean, I guess I have a little bit of trepidation about that. I'm a little bit worried because, I mean, we want to tell the truth about what things have been done to minority populations around the world in every country, but there's also this way in which populations can always be represented as victims, right? And not the positive things coming out of the culture. So I guess I'm just saying, with the caveat that one should be careful of that. I think in the United States, the discovery of the abuse of African Americans in the Tuskegee study was a major proponent of us having regulations to begin with, right? I mean, there were other things that had happened in the past in our country and other countries, but it was the discovery of that in the popular press that made the American government say, oh, we need to do something, that led directly to federal regulations. So sometimes when you show people the mirror of what's been going on in their own country, then they say, oh yes, we should do something.
Mm-hmm. And interesting, when we look at our research integrity learning material, now we just have now our train the trainer. We use this Tuskegee case from the US, but we have no own. So we have a lot of misconduct and fraud cases in Europe, yeah, but we don't have such a Tuskegee case not yet available in the sense of, okay, look at it. And I don't believe that we didn't do it. So
right.
too many people.
I mean, there's always Nazi examples, right?
Yeah, we do have them. Yeah, but we don't use them because it's we have there's a difference. So we use them, of course, to discuss. Actually, Katharina and I made one session on it. But there's one difference, what appears when you use the Nazi examples. There's always the difference of there are two legal systems. There's the legal system of the Nazi Reich, and you have the legal system of now. And then you start the discussion of oh, okay, how do we handle these two legal systems? So this was in the past, it was another legal system, it was not ours. And then it makes it more difficult to transfer something from the past into the now.
And it's a German case. And I've even been told, I'm the current president of the European Women Lawyers Association, and being born a German, I don't have a problem to use Nazi examples as bad examples. But I was told from my German members that we should not always use German examples, because Germans are not only the bad. So just that was also quite interesting. Mm-hmm. Oh, sorry.
Just a quick response. I agree. And similarly, we wouldn't want to just always use the Tuskegee example. Although I guess, well, there's a couple things that come to mind, but one is the phrase, I can't remember the exact name of it, but as soon as you bring up Nazis, you've lost the argument, right? But what about the Nazis, right? So you can't be doing that all the time. But there's plenty around the world to go around, the Japanese, and we have lots of examples of bad American behavior. So use us as well.
Thank you, Lisa. Håkan.
Yes, thank you. I would just like to thank you, Lisa, for a very nice presentation, first of all, and thank you for arranging this. But I would just like to comment on this issue relating to the two legal systems, that you had the Nazi legal system and the ordinary, the good system, as it were. Perhaps that could be a good thing to highlight, because we want to stress that moral issues are different from legal ones. So even if something is approved of by a certain legal system, that doesn't imply that it's morally okay. So you perhaps can make use of that.
Yeah, and I'll second that and say one of the things I try to talk to especially my undergraduates about is it's not an accident that we've used the people that we've used in the way we've used them, right? It's not for the most part, people like me or people like them. It is, we've used people in Guatemala, we've used the African Americans, you know, we have used the disabled. We choose people who can't fight. And so paired with the legal versus moral point that Håkan was bringing up, we can also say this is a structural thing to pay attention to. What makes certain lives less valuable, more easily used, like the Roma, right?
Yeah, the problem, yeah, the challenge I still see is to connect this topic, equality, with research integrity. This is really a challenge. And I think I also said this last time, I repeat it again because there's some new people here. When we had a discussion with the one of the top organizers of the World Conference on Research Integrity, and I asked him, oh, and we were talking about the Hong Kong principles that were published in 2019. And there's nothing on gender, as you said, Lisa. He said, yeah, why should there be anything on gender? So that was the reaction. And it's an expert on the topic of research integrity. So, and an older expert. So how would we be able to challenge this, right? This question, why should there be anything on gender or on equality?
Yeah, that's exactly the question. And I'm, all of this has come out of that question, really, for me. And part of it was this self-consciousness when I would talk to other colleagues who were teaching research ethics courses. And I was sort of wondering, am I unusual in including issues of race and gender in my class? Should they be doing it? Should I be arguing that more of us should be doing it? And, you know, I started including it in my classes, and it went fine, but I still, it's not enough yet. So maybe one of the questions is, what is it that we're trying to achieve? Is it getting gender and race mentioned in these codes or in the core areas? I'm not sure that's the goal, because there's some value in focusing on what is unique to the concern with research ethics and research integrity. That's integrity is where a lot of people will try and boil down the field, right? So this is why I said, when we were talking about the epistemic argument, if integrity is about the good of the science, I think there's a lot of ways we can link bias to leading to bad science. And we can teach, you know, that all day long, and that will help. And so maybe one of the goals is just more people should be teaching it, and here's how to teach it. But, you know, I have had this outline and this set of concerns articulated for a few years now, and I just can't quite push it over the line into a paper, because I think I'm not entirely sure who my audience is. Is it the regulators who just need to understand that these are the issues? Am I talking to my fellow educators who I want to urge to include these in their classroom? Am I talking to all researchers to say you should see this? And I can't address all three of them. It would be a very messy paper. And then I can't figure out who would be most receptive, you know? And so so far, I've really stuck more with trying to argue with my fellow educators and give them the tools to do this. So the first time I gave a presentation about this, there was a woman who used to be the head of the Office of Research Integrity. And she said, I think this is all great, but I don't think I can teach this because I don't have any background in this. And I said, well, I don't have any background in data management. I'm not a scientist, I'm a philosopher, but I'm still supposed to teach that when I teach my research integrity class. So in a very interdisciplinary field, we all have to work outside of our comfort zones, and we have to do responsible work to figure out what to bring to our students in those areas. So those kinds of lower level arguments, I think I can get over. And maybe that is, I'm talking out loud and trying to figure this out myself. So jump in if anybody has any ideas, but maybe the first step really is talk to the people doing this teaching, because if we can get the instructors comfortable and give them examples of how to do it, then they're educating the next group, and we don't have to convince the powers that be that it needs to go into the European or the American code. We just teach the next generation of students.
I would be completely with you if I wouldn't live in Germany, but let me tell you, as from a German perspective, yeah, if you don't address the gender issue at the top, yeah, you always think, okay, next year it's going to be better. Yeah, next year it's going to be better. Yeah, but the numbers actually show. Yeah, if you look at the gender gap in Germany, yeah, it didn't get better until it was altered at the top. Yeah, in sense of gender pay gap. Yeah, or whatever you want to look at. Yeah, but let me go back to your question. What do we want to do? And so in path to integrity, of course, it was the same question at the beginning. Our aim was to make a good training for responsible conduct of research. But what does that mean? Yeah, so this is a phrase. Yeah, and what does it mean? And what does it mean for which target group? And what we concentrated on at the end is we want to train them to conduct research which leads to reliable research results. So we concentrated on this reliable research results. And for me, this is the most important part. And when I look at reliable research results, then actually I come to your first part. It's just what we have such a lot of examples which shows when we don't take the gender aspect into account, or sometimes we only have to check it in a sense of, did we oversee something? No, okay, then we can proceed. But we have examples which show if you don't check it, sometimes it goes really south in a sense that these results are not reliable. And when we connect this to the codes of conduct, because I think the codes of conduct are in place to secure the big community of researchers, in a sense of that, to lead us in the right direction. So then we have to implement the gender and the race aspects there somehow. But I know it's a big step to do, and for some it's a weird step to do.
And I guess they're not mutually exclusive. We can pursue them all at the same time, but maybe that's just the low-hanging fruit, and we go for that because it is the easy argument, right? You can't convince people by showing them empirical papers on this. So that starts to get, but you still are not. I guess here's my worry. We can teach researchers that if you have these biases, you're going to end up with bad science. And they say, well, then I'm going to get rid of the bias, right? As though there's a checklist you can use to fix the problem. And then the next argument in that path is you have to see the structures and understand what's going on. You have to kind of be a little bit of a feminist or a critical race theorist or something, so that you can better see it in your own work. You don't have to wait for someone to come later and say, oh, that was a bias, right?
Håkan.
Yes, thank you. Perhaps one way of doing it would be to refer to very profound ideas about discrimination relating to morally insignificant properties. Because I think some researchers are threatened by the very words of race and gender, and they're somewhat hesitant to make use of them. But if you could perhaps argue that these issues are related to very profound ideas about what properties are morally significant and what properties are not, then perhaps you could add on to that in a way of making them realize that these typical issues are very important by a detour, as it were.
Yeah, do you have an example?
Yeah, perhaps you could, when it comes to salary, well, assume that there are two persons, A and B, and we'll try to motivate why one person is supposed to get a higher salary than the other. And then you can point to working hours, workload, experience, and so on and so forth. But if you then end up with two identical lists, they are equally experienced, equally well-educated, equally exposed to risks, and so on and so forth. And then you say, well, this person has still got a higher salary than the other one. Now it seems to be a case of discrimination, because now we cannot find a property that make it plausible to argue that one person is supposed to get a higher salary than the other. And then we perhaps might say that, well, this is a man and this is a woman. And this is a completely irrational, immoral, and irrational way of arguing, actually. Well, that's one idea, perhaps. I don't know.
Yeah, it sounds good, but then my next question to you would be: Are you focusing, or do you have an equality perspective when you teach?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, for example.
Well, when we teach research ethics at Stockholm University, we are supposed to make use of that distinction. So suppose from one perspective, it's a scientific perspective. This is bad, the poor science. If the results are biased, and you cannot pay attention, the results are not reliable form. But then we also have discussions in relation to our colleagues, the power relations, and also supervision issues. And as also Lisa mentioned, I think it's very important to be aware of the various that you also mentioned, the Romani population. They suffer badly. It's a huge problem for them. It would be a scientific importance to perhaps know more about the power structures, injustices done in the history, and so on. And it's the results that the research might end up with is also political impact, huge political impact. But then you have to, in a way, try to balance the political and scientific values with what Lisa hinted at least, the stereotype threats and the Pygmalion effect and so on. So yes, we discussed that a lot, actually.
Oh, brilliant! Thank you.
So,
yeah.
So as I understand your division between the first, so the second one was structure, but what was the first one? How did you call it? Epistemic approach. So for me, it's in my words, when I just associate it to my thinking, it's okay. We do have this goal of scientific work that we have at the end, reliable, objective. Okay, some say, oh, objective, be careful, and valid results. And if you look at like in German literature, we still use this criteria. Yeah, they come like these three criteria. Sometimes the fourth one comes on. Yeah, and so and nobody there talks about respect. Like in when I say there, I mean now philosophy of science. Yeah, nobody goes into the deep about, okay, you have to be respectful to your colleagues, or you have to do this and that. Yeah. And for me, it looks like there is actually a shift. Yeah, when we look at this philosophy of science, yeah, which uses these criteria, and I think we still can find it internationally that they are somehow used, at least in the discussion of empirical and non-empirical research, and what is well used more, yeah, in that sense. And when we then look at the standardization through codes of conduct, in the sense of what is research integrity, and we have to follow research integrity. So these are two strains coming coming together, but they don't fit completely. And actually, I do think that this traditional, objective, reliable, and valid result is not enough anymore. Yeah. So we realized we need more. Yeah. And of course, there's a long tradition on virtues in research and on moral behavior in research, but when we look at Europe, especially, it was never discussed so openly, and it was never depicted in numbers. And I think this is something which leaves the scientific community to think about, okay, what do we want to be researched in the future? Yeah? And when because this is always when we teach, yeah, we bring the next generation to think about, okay, what is your idea of research, and what will you do in the future as a researcher? Yeah, but Håkan, I think it's really interesting because, like, I think we need to connect. Your suggestion was actually to connect both, yeah, with your moral properties, so we still can stay on the completely rational scientific side, yeah, what research actually is, but add the differentiation and have a closer look at, okay, why do we have these distinctions sometimes in the results?
Yeah, because we have, in a way, it's a conflict of interest. We know that perhaps this is scientifically valuable, and that perhaps for some groups of value to their well-being, but there are also some groups that be affected negatively. So we have to strike a balance between these interests. And I think then the scientific side is one important part of it, but not the whole part.
I guess my next question, though, is if we get people to understand that there are problems in the science, in the objectivity, reliability, and validity of the science, when you have a certain bias, they might say, oh, yes, I can see that. But if they don't do the scientific thing, which is to ask why, they're doomed to repeat it. And to me, the only answer to why is these structural, or maybe a better word for people who are a little bit resistant to the structural claim is systematic, right? So in some ways, I started to define statistics for myself as the systematic approach to eliminating error, right? And so if we think about this as yet another way we're trying to eliminate error, you have to understand you have to theorize what is happening below what you can see, right? What could possibly account for the fact that people have traditionally chosen all male animals to work with? What could that possibly be? I don't know. Maybe it's because they don't know how to take, menstrual cycles into account, and pregnancy and female bodies, right? And it's that systematic, and it's not that they're misogynist not to do so, they just don't see it. And so if we can't make them see it, then they can't avoid it in the future. And so that's why I keep going back to the second argument, which is the structural one, right? So maybe we hook them with the empirical epistemic argument, and then we kind of keep them and really help them solve the problem with the structural argument.
And I come back now, I jump in now as a regulator, as a lawyer, a feminist, a legal lawyer, a legal feminist. For example, if we lawyers say, or we feminist lawyers say that if we want to change a society, we can only do this by regulation. For example, quota regulation. We think that we can only change our societies by using regulation. And if I'm thinking of more women on boards, on public boards or private boards of companies, then we can only do this by quota regulation. However, I've also come to the conclusion I'm a strong defender of quota regulation with strong sanctions, because only then a quota regulation works. with strong sanctions. And a strong sanction is economic sanctions. Economic sanctions that hurt, because if not, sanctions normally don't work. But I also have come to the conclusion that only regulation does not work either. We have to explain people why we have this regulation. We need awareness raising, education, training, and make people see or understand why it is necessary. So I think it has to be both. And then coming back to your question, Lisa, your question before, to whom do we address, or whom do you address with your articles? I think at the moment, everybody really, and at the later stage, maybe then you can have a distinction. But I think at the moment we are still at a very early stage where we just have to, like we do here, inform each other, get secure about our arguments. I think at the moment it's still this moment of starting the conversation.
I think that's helpful. I was just making a note to myself, and so maybe turning this into an article that makes the case for why this should count, but then have a later section that says, and here are the implications for regulators, for educators, for researchers, would be, and maybe leave some of these specific examples about how to teach it out, or just cite them briefly in the educators section.
Because I do think it's really difficult for the education sector, because when you, of course, you can, when you concentrate on awareness raising, you can use the number, you can use cases and numbers, as we did right now. But when you want them to reflect the structure, now I think I understand you, when you want them actually to go deep, in the sense of they understand the system and how actions and dependencies stabilize the system, and it's really difficult to change it, and not only on gender but on race and on intersections, in different. Actually, I do think this is a completely different approach of learning than the awareness raising. Awareness raising is actually quite easy. It's not easy, but it's something we know how to do as trained teachers. And the other part is also when when I think about it at first sight, I would say, okay, there's a lot. It has a lot to do with motivation. Actually, I want to see it, because if you don't want to see it, you're never going to see the structure of the system. It has a lot to do of, okay, to empower the people, because you feel so overwhelmed by, okay, this is the system now, and I am just this little candle in the system, so I stop again. So it's not only about understanding, like cognitive understanding, it's a lot about empowerment and how I can act in such a system. This is a big picture and in the long run in teaching.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think just taking notes here, I think one of the things that we do when we're consciousness raising is we're adopting a sort of information deficit approach, sort of saying, well, people would change their minds if only they could see what they're not seeing. So we educate them, right? And the National Science Foundation has had a program for a long time to support ethics in research. And it's changed its focus over the years. And so several years ago, I guess, it changed from, gosh, I can't even remember what the original acronym is. It's 3 acronyms ago. But the one that they adopted maybe 7 years ago was Cultivating Cultures of Ethical STEM, because they realized that the information deficit approach didn't work, or it only worked this much, right? So then people can say, yes, I'm aware that there have been only male animals used in research and that led to problems. Great, I won't do that, right? And then it ends there. And so you're right that the next step is then motivational or empowerment. And I think this helping them see the structures and the systems is the next step. But I agree with you, it's challenging. And I think it's also, this is one of those times where you have to be careful what language you use, because if you say, you know, structural oppression and misogynist and racist ideals, then people start to get nervous, even if those are accurate, right? I think there are ways, and I think this is kind of what Håkan was talking about earlier, that if you help them see there are systematic approaches we have used in the past that we didn't recognize led to biased results, then maybe what you can do instead of telling people is use the Socratic method and say, how might we avoid these kinds of issues in the future? And then they're generating responses like, well, I should probably consider multiple genders, right? If we got to 2 genders, that would at least be improvement over 1, right? But then that could be an invitation to open it up beyond that, right? And to make a distinction between sex and gender. And at a certain point, somebody will start to feel like there's a political education happening here. And so I think we have to be careful about what we're saying, how we're saying it, who's in the room, what they're responsive to. I'm convinced that you can talk to people of multiple belief systems about these issues and they'll see them objectively, but there are some ways that are successful in doing that and some ways that aren't.
I am totally with you, and I think I get what you are trying to tell us, because still in Europe we are not that far, but reading a little bit about what's going on in the United States, I think in Texas, there has just opened the first university. Okay, now you have to help me, where you can openly discuss things, but that's a university which says that is free of gender. Oh, okay, it's a university that I think is has been created by very conservative people. So they wanted to make them free of all gender democratic discussions and just focus on whatever they think is important, because they didn't want to be in the influence of gender race discussions. So I see where you're coming from, Lisa, and we are far away, I think, from this here in Europe, but it can be that this happens as well, because we have this very right-wing influence now in all of our countries as well. And the first thing they are against is always gender discussions or gender education. So I can absolutely get what you are talking about. Yeah.
And here a lot of the conversations about critical race theory, or CRT it's called, and I don't know the university you're talking about, but I can well imagine it, and it's ringing a vague bell. But I would be surprised if all of these things weren't happening in Europe, given the similar political climates. But I do think, part of what has happened in the United States, I think, is that the use of language sometimes can divide people rather than bring them together. And I'm always careful of that in the classroom. At the same time, I'm also really aware of scholars and some of my colleagues who point out that if you don't name something, people can't then see it. So I ideally would like to thread the needle where I use language that will help people recognize something for what it is, that doesn't make them feel like I'm trying to one-up them with my superior knowledge of academic terminology and schools of thought, that brings them into the conversation rather than pushes them out, but that gives them a name for what they're seeing. And I don't think I get that balance right most of the time, but it's always the one that I'm looking for.
I've tried to find the university, but I'm not able to find it so quickly. But I will find it, and then I will send you the reference. Yeah, Julia, sorry, you.
No, I just wanted to point out that we really have to be careful, and I think it's always about, okay, what do we want to reach? As you said, Lisa, at the beginning, we have to think about, okay, where do we want to go? And for me, in this area of my work, actually, I want to secure research in the sense of that we reach reliable results. And I think this is yeah. I never met somebody who said no. So this this is something. Yes, okay. Everybody says yes. Okay, let's do that. And then, of course, there's a big discussion about how we are going to do that. But it doesn't divide from the beginning on. So, and I think we have to concentrate on this in the research community. And I remember, Katharina, as you said at the beginning, from Path to Integrity, when you as gender expert raised this, you actually only raised questions in a sense of is there a gender issue? Do we have to look at it from a different angle? Some of our consortium members were astonished that this question actually was asked, because they couldn't connect the question to their work. But on our way, I just make one example. We had a lot of incidences connected to gender. For example, we made a quite big campaign. I do not know if you get across it, like the blue posters with role models on it from 10 different countries, and like really famous role models, famous researchers, and they are advocating for research integrity in different with different speech bubbles. And this campaign was made by one partner, and another partner from the consortium made an evaluation if the posters really transported the message we wanted to transport. And at the end of the evaluation, I got the results, and the result was that none of the female researchers survived the evaluation. So we had, at the beginning, we had 50-50 on posters, and after the evaluation, we had 100% male researchers. So the discussion again arose, okay, shall we now implement the female researchers back, because we do not want to stand for a campaign where no female researchers displayed, and we actually want them to be displayed. And so I don't have answers actually for all these issues which arise. I had to make decisions, and I did. So we have now again our female researchers on the posters, but I don't have best ways how to handle it. It was really like we were in the middle. In like, okay, here you have it. And and this is just one example.
Yeah. Did they give reasons?
No. So we asked them to. So it was, the evaluation was spread in Europe, mainly done in 4 countries. It's not Europe, I know, but it was done in 4 countries, from PhD to senior researchers, and they had to click. So they saw the poster, and then there was the question: do you think this poster stands for research integrity? Yes, maybe, no. This was it was a really simple evaluation, and yes, the female researchers didn't survive, and we do not know. Maybe it was because of the speech bubbles they had, because they didn't have all the same. So I can't say. So we didn't randomize it, because it was not our research. Actually, we just wanted to check, if our messages go through. Right. But at the end, all female researchers were gone.
So this was multiple people for the feedback.
Yeah. There were we got the feedback from 300 people.
I can't download for some reason. I was trying to open.
Oh yeah, no, you are downloading it, and you have a folder. I'm sure that you have a folder on your computer where you download things without knowing it, so that it might be there, or you just open a new window.
Yeah, it's not doing. That's right. I can look at it later, but yeah, the randomization would have been really interesting, wouldn't it?
But as I said, it was not one of our research questions. It was just, it was by doing it. We had no focus on it. It just came across us. and we were confronted by it in a sense of, oh, okay, so what do we do now? And of course, they are perfect starting points for research now. Yeah, so it would be interesting to see if randomized the same would happen. Yeah, and so on and so on. But still, this example gives a hint. I would not say it proves nothing, but it gives the hint that there is still a lot of bias in who stands for this objective, reliable research and who doesn't.
Absolutely. I mean, it all started with our logo of Path Integrity. I can show it to you here. It's this now, but it was very difficult for us to come to this point where you can see here women, and these are two men and a woman of another color, and that was a whole journey in itself. And I think it took seven different intents, Julia, was it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think what does it display? It displays that we are a consortium from six different countries in Europe, and of course, all of us have different. We come with different presuppositions. But at the beginning, there were only males on the picture. Yeah, it was interesting. But just to say, and we said it before in another session too, when we look at our data, so we have a really extensive evaluation in Path Integrity about the learning of research integrity. Yeah? And when we look at our data, actually there is, from our student side, we couldn't find any difference until now. So there is no difference in how they learn research integrity, the topics of research integrity.
So a question that I asked the last sessions as well, what are our next steps now? Because I'm a very hands-on person, also pragmatic and very future and solution oriented. Lisa, you have last time or the first session you spoke about this journal and maybe an extra journal that you would be able to edit. What do you think? Would this be a good thing to do?
Yeah, so I'm the editor-in-chief of Accountability and Research, which is a research integrity journal. And I took over in May from Adil Shamu. And I've been sort of getting my feet under me and adding some people to the editorial board and the as associate editors. And I'm actually due to have a conversation with our publishing liaison, because we're trying to figure out, can we even do a special issue anymore, given the way people consume journals and given the way this particular journal is published. So it's one physical copy at the end of the year. And we just, things are published online like so many journals as soon as they're ready, and then you just fill things up. So I'm not actually sure we can do a special issue, but I know in the Citizen Science Journal I'm a part of, we can do special collections, which is just gathering articles that have been published on a certain topic and showcasing them on the website as a special collection. So then it doesn't matter as much when things come in. So that's kind of the way I'm leaning now. But one of the things we're working on is rewriting our aims and scope. And one of the things that we've been talking about doing is broadening the aims and scope to say, we are particularly interested in articles that try to broaden the concept of research integrity and research ethics that we traditionally have been operating with. And just that circulated to various groups of people, I think would help us attract more scholarship in this area. So I think that's one of the ways we're heading for. But I can say in the meantime, if anybody's interested in publishing in these areas and challenging our notions of research integrity, or asking the question, what counts as research integrity or research ethics? What should we change about it? We're very receptive to those articles. And so once we get everything kind of edited on the website and get the new board in place, then I think I would push it out as a wider message, but we're also immediately interested in these kinds of questions as well.
Perfect. So that was an invitation to all that were here that
Yes.
if you would like to contribute and publish with you, that we can reach out to you, right?
Yes, absolutely. And I will, let me get the website here.
Maybe Katharina, it's a suggestion, but we could add to our Path to Integrity website at the end of the series. We could also refer to you, Lisa, for the possibility to publish something, because I think there were, like, over the sessions now, different ideas which could be published, and so that you can show the way where it would be possible.
Perfect.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. Super. Are there any more questions? Anything anyone would like to bring in? Something that we haven't mentioned? Oh, so much food for thought that you brought to us, Lisa, I think. Yeah.
So Lisa, I actually I saw your poster at the World Conference 2 years ago or 3 years ago. Yeah, and it was really, for me, it was really interesting. But is it possible somehow to get your slides, or do you have it published somewhere?
I'm happy to
Not
send them to you. The ones from the ones I showed today, you mean?
today, yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, I'm happy to send them to you. They are not hosted anywhere. And I guess we can chat offline about, so I'm happy to have them circulated to people who are here, but they're not fully baked. So it would just be a work in progress kind of slides, as long as everyone understands that. Yeah.
Mhm. Oh, that would be nice. No?
Yeah.
Sure.
And I think, Lisa, I already told you that in our German book that we are co-editing, Julia and myself, that I mention you the whole time. So my whole,
True, I read it.
yeah, my whole 30 pages in German are only about you. So we started the conversation in Germany, at least, which is a good sign. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, I would then, I'm looking at you, but I would then, with your consent, close the session of today, because I think we talked about many things, and I myself feel the need to think about all we said, because a lot has been said, but now I think we have to do this intro version, right, in order to start writing and have the output in written in order to raise awareness and get more change agents, not to reach more change agents, or to make them see. Yeah, brilliant. So yeah, I would then close the session and thank everybody who participated today. Thank you very much, Lisa. That was so interesting.
Thank you, and thank you for gathering this group. It's been very helpful.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. And I hope you will all join us in the next session, which will be on the 7th of December. And in this session, we will really talk about the global North versus global South. And our speaker will be an African researcher from Africa. He's our board member, advisory board member from Zambia, but now living in Ghana. And he has a lot to say about race. So I think it will be also very interesting, and we will dive deeper into this race issue between global North and global South. And this will be a new aspect, a different aspect of our conversation on equality and research integrity. So for now, thank you very much. Lisa, you have the last word. Anything else you would like to say to close this session of today?
Two things. One is just thank you very much for both Path to Integrity and for getting this special set of talks together. And also, if anybody has ideas about where a good venue would be to publish a paper about this that would reach the right kind of audience besides the journal I edit, then I would really love to hear those ideas as well.
Yeah. Okay.
I will think about it, Lisa. But I think, yeah, when something comes up to my mind, I will write you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Brilliant. So have a lovely day, Lisa. It's a morning for you, so have a lovely rest of the day. The rest to us that we are Europeans, have a lovely evening. And see you all on the 7th of December at the same time.
Great. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye. 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 Bye.